In this video, we are going to learn how to use translucency maps, opacity maps, and emission maps. These are three maps that are not present in your default fill layer. So if I create a new fill layer, you'll see that this just contains color, metal, roughness, normal, and height. So all these other three maps are ones that we have to add from in Substance Painter to be able to use them. Let's start with the opacity map. So I'm going to add this from my texture set settings, which is right next to the layers tab. If you don't see the texture set settings here, you can go to window and reset UI to get the default UI. I prefer not having my 2D view visible always. So I'm going to go up here to this option right here and set this to 3D only. And in my texture set settings, I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to go to the channels section. Here is where I can add new maps that are supported for the shader. So I'm going to click on plus and add my opacity. So I'm going to click on opacity, and now this is part of my options. And if I go back to the new fill layer I added, I now have opacity. So opacity controls whether the mesh is visible or not visible. So usually you set the opacity to either 1 or to 0. And 1 is when the mesh is completely visible, and 0 should be when the mesh is invisible. But by default, you don't really see the mesh become invisible when you set it to 0. And you need to change this by going to the shader settings on the right of your window. And if you scroll down here, you can see an opacity option. So you need to enable the opacity for it to be visible. So I'm going to enable alpha blending. This one is, I think it gives you more flexibility with your opacity results. So I'm going to turn on enable alpha blending, and you can see that the model immediately disappears. If I set this to a slightly higher value, you can see that it starts kind of coming back. An important thing to remember for opacity is that we don't use this for see-through glass. We use a different attribute called translucency for that. This is just to either make something visible or make it invisible. So now let's set this to 0, and let's right click and add a black mask. We can now, let's choose a brush. So this is usually used for cutout. So I'm going to choose a basic hard brush, and let's make this properties paint a little bigger. And I'm going to right click and add a paint layer. I'm going to scroll down, and let's use the basic hard, and let's go to the alpha section, and let's add one of these alphas. So this is the icon right here is to add alphas, and you can import your own. An alpha is just a black and white image, and you can make your own in Photoshop or another software and bring it into Substance. So let's say we bring in this alpha, flower stylized, and I drag this over to the alpha section. I can now, on my paint layer, paint this flower, and you'll see that this part becomes completely see-through. Let's right click, we can change the size of this brush, and when we paint, we can completely see through this part of the mesh. And as I said, remember that this is usually set either 0 or 1, and that's what gives you the best results. It's mostly used for cutouts like this. The best use for you guys would be the vents. So this is opacity, and I think a natural progression to this is now going to be translucency to show you the difference between the two. I'm going to hide this layer for now, and I'm going to create a translucency layer. All of these new maps are added through the texture set settings, so I'm going to go back to that. And I'm going to go to the top, and let's make this a little bigger. Go to channels, and I'm going to set translucency. So this is translucency determines how transparent or opaque the glass is, and this would be different across different types of glass. So you have frosted glass, you have glass that isn't as transparent, so this controls how transparent it is. And then you have the absorption color that controls the color of that glass. And if your glass is just going to be a singular color, you don't really need to have the absorption color in Substance Painter. You can just set it in Maya. but I just like to use it as a preview to get an idea of what color would look good with the rest of my arcade. So I'm going to add translucency and absorption color and create a new fill layer. You'll see that this now has absorption color and translucency. I'm going to turn off the color for this layer, and let's actually remove one of my other layers. Let's go to the wood and let's remove it from this object. So actually, yeah, let's remove it from this object so that we can actually see the glass effect on this. So let's go to my glass and turn on translucency and absorption color. Translucency starts off at a value of 0. So 0 is 0 translucency. It does not look like glass at all. And 1 is 100% translucency. So this usually does not automatically is not automatically turned on. You do need to change it by going to your shader settings and enable translucency. So this might not be turned on by default for you guys. So you just need to go back to the shader settings and in the interior section, enable translucency and also enable absorption. So these two values need to be enabled. And let's close this out. You'll notice that all my layers kind of got a little muddy, like all of them started disappearing a bit. This is because the translucency is now affecting every layer under it until we add maybe a black mask to this to make it stop. So usually, like if you have a translucency and you want it to not affect certain parts, you can also go to each layer and affect the translucency attribute and set that to 0. But in this case, I am just going to go to this, add a black mask, and then click on this icon right here and enable it just for this mesh. So this is my translucency, and you can now see that this kind of looks like glass. You can control how much translucency you want to make it frosted glass or whatever other type of glass you want to add. You could then also change the absorption color. Absorption color is the color of the glass. So you can set this to a color that you like. And you can also add wear and tear to the glass. So glass by default is never going to be like completely, it's not going to have no damage to it. So let's try adding dust to the glass. So we create a new fill layer and we're going to use the color attribute in this. We're going to use translucency and set that to 0. We're going to use roughness and set this to a very rough value. And we are going to use, I think that's good. And we can put this in a folder. So now let's say this is my glass folder. And I'm going to copy over this mask so I can control where the glass is. So I'm going to copy mask and then paste it onto this folder so that I can use that to control where my glass is going to go. So right now this is my dust layer and these are the attributes that I've activated. Make sure to set the translucency to 0 on this. If you don't do that, then it's not going to really give you the dust effect that you want because it's going to sort of get the translucency from the layer below it. So set the translucency to 0, then go to your smart masks and drag on the dust soft edges. So this is going to give you dust on the edges. If we can use different ones, so there's dust dirty. So when you're bringing this into Maya, there's a way to set it up so that your dust and your glass works together. But basically, this is how I would set up glass. I would have a glass layer and I would have maybe one or multiple wear and tear layers to make it look like the glass is dirty. Then, of course, you can go into these masks and edit how much of the dust you actually see. You can add another paint layer and paint on dust or dirt or whatever you want to paint. So this is how you would do see-through glass. You can also add a scratches layer to make it look a little better. But this is how you would do see-through glass. And let's hide this one as well. And this is different from the opacity because even when the glass is set to a value of 1, it's still not going to disappear like the opacity did. It's going to be see-through, but it is not going to disappear. It mimics the properties of glass and the way that light passes through glass. I'm going to turn this off and go back to texture set settings for our last option. So I'm going to add in emission. So a lot of you can use this. So I'm going to just do the same thing, click on plus, add emissive. So this is the best use for this is, I would say, using it for your screen. So I'm going to go back down to my screen so I can use it. So this is my mid screen, which is on an arcade machine. You have this mid screen which has your actual game. So I'm going to put my image above the screen. So I got in my image that I downloaded, and I'm going to set this to be a texture. And I'm going to import it. So I would say the best place to import it is into your project, because then you'll be able to access it at home and in class. If you import it to your library is local to the computer you're on. So unless you transfer it over to your hard drive as well, it's going to be local to that computer. So let's import it to the project. Click on import and it will appear. So Pac-Man screen is my layer. Let's add a new fill layer right above mid screen so we can see this emission. I'm going to add this fill layer and I'm going to drag my Pac-Man screen into base color, and I'm going to turn on emission and drag this into emission as well. So obviously this is not what we want. This is kind of what we want. So let's go to our 3D, 2D view so we can see the Pac-Man screen. Let's make this smaller. So hold down Shift to get a uniform scale. And let's kind of set it to that screen. So you'll see that it is repeating. So it's repeating multiple times. That's not what we want. So we need to change some properties of the layer. We can set the scale to physical size and set the UV wrap to none. So now it's going to just show up once. So I'm going to scale that down. Let's use the scale section. So change the width and the height. They are linked. You can see that they're locked. So they'll maintain the same aspect ratio. So change that. And move that screen over to where it's supposed to be. And let's say this is sort of what you want it to look like. Maybe it's not very precise, but you get the idea. You just set it to what you want it to be. And now you have a glowing screen. So I'm using it for both the base color and the emissive, the same thing. So they sort of play off of each other and give you that glowing screen effect. This will look much, much better in Maya. So in Substance, it doesn't give you the full effect, but in Maya, when you plug this in, it's going to look great. So you have base color, you have emissive. If you wanted to glow a little more, you could go to shader settings, and near the top, you have emissive intensity, so you could increase that. And if these images are slightly different, if the emissive image is slightly brighter than the base color, and you have two different images that you bring in, it might look a little nicer because you'll have two different colors for the emissive and the base color. But even just using the exact same image in both places will give you a nice glow to your screen and make it look like a real arcade game. So these, all these images that we've used, all these maps that we've used, are all going to look different when you take them into Maya. So when we add them here, it's just a sort of preview to see how they're going to turn out at the end of it. And I think earlier when I was working on this file, I also added an emissive to this baby Pac-Man at the top. So that's also sort of glowing. So whenever you have a banner like this or a Pac-Man or a screen like this, you can use the emissive to make it look a little nicer.